A bitter wind swept over the barren fields of Ironfrost, where the weight of centuries rested on silent, frozen soil. In a land ruled by cold indifference, the smallest spark was enough to ignite a storm. This was a time when the quiet murmur of discontent grew louder with every dawn. Under the dim glow of a failing moon, whispers of a rebellion began to echo among the oppressed. In the heart of Ironfrost, a motley band of peasants, long relegated to a life of hardship, dared to challenge the old order. Their eyes burned with a fierce determination, an unyielding promise that change was at hand. It was not the grand armies of kings or the opulent courts that would shape history this day. It was the simple, untrained hands of those who had nothing left to lose. As the chill of tyranny clung to the air, the uprising surged like a tidal wave. Each step taken by these common souls defied the rigid chains of tradition and cruelty. Their journey was a battle cry against the cold grip of power, a moment when the dawn of freedom began to flicker in the hearts of the many. In this world of stark contrasts, the Ironfrost uprising emerged not as a planned conquest but as a spontaneous surge of hope, a force that would reshape destiny and shatter the darkness that had long oppressed them. The land of Ironfrost was a cold and harsh place. Here, the winter seemed to last forever, and life was not easy for the common folk. The vast plains and rugged hills were covered in a layer of frost that never quite melted. In these lands, the small, humble villages were scattered like tiny sparks in a dark, endless night. Each village carried its own story of struggle and hope, a tale passed down through whispered conversations and quiet prayers. The people of Ironfrost lived under the weight of a harsh rule. The land was owned by powerful lords who cared little for the suffering of their people. Far from the grand castles and towering keeps, the peasants toiled in the fields, their backs bending under the weight of endless labor. Their homes were small and bare, much like the unforgiving world they inhabited. The bitter climate offered no mercy, and the people learned to make do with very little. In the market squares and along the narrow, winding roads, whispers of discontent grew louder with every passing day. The villagers spoke in hushed tones of a time when the land might be free from the heavy chains of oppression. They recalled old stories of heroes who once walked among them, when even the smallest voice could spark a mighty change. Yet, as each day passed, hope seemed to wane under the shadow of a rule that cared nothing for their pain. A dark mist of injustice had settled over Ironfrost. The lords lived in splendid isolation in their high towers, far removed from the cold reality of the common folk. The peasants, by contrast, faced a daily battle against hunger, the relentless cold, and the cruelty of those in power. Every sunrise brought a new struggle, and every small success was a rare treasure in a world filled with hardship. In the fields, where the wind howled like a warning, the people found a hidden strength in one another. After long, exhausting days of work, they would gather together, sharing tales of their suffering and dreams of a better life. The simple act of sharing bread or offering a kind word grew into a subtle form of rebellion against the heavy hand of the rulers. These quiet moments of unity built a foundation of courage that had been slowly growing beneath the surface. As the chill deepened and the nights grew longer, the growing unrest in Ironfrost could no longer be ignored. Every heart beat with a quiet determination, a belief that even the smallest light could push back the darkness. The old ways were crumbling, and in the hidden corners of each village, plans for a new dawn began to take shape. Murmurs of change drifted through the air like the first hints of a coming storm. In the stillness of early morning, when the frost still clung to every blade of grass, the people of Ironfrost began to wonder if this might be the moment their lives would change forever. The stage was now set for a transformation that had been whispered about for generations, a time when the oppressed would rise together and challenge the cold grip of power. Every whispered plan and silent gathering wove together the first threads of a rebellion that promised to light up the darkness. In the quiet corners of Ironfrost, a spark began to glow. It started with a single voice, low and steady, speaking out against the long-held rules. In one small village, a man named Corvin, whose heart burned for justice, began to question the ways of the lords. His words, simple yet full of defiance, spread like wildfire. Soon, a few brave souls joined him, each carrying their own stories of loss and hardship. Their whispers grew louder, filling the cold night with dreams of a different future. For generations, the people had endured their suffering in silence. They had bent their backs beneath the weight of cruel taxes and merciless overseers. They had watched their children grow weak from hunger while the lords feasted behind stone walls. The rebellion did not begin with swords or fire. It began with a choice. A choice to stop accepting the world as it was and to believe, even for a moment, that something greater was possible. Corvin's message was clear. Life did not have to be an unbroken chain of servitude. In hushed gatherings around modest fires, the villagers began to plan. They met in secret, deep in the woods or beneath the crumbling remains of forgotten shrines. Their discussions were not of war, not yet. They spoke of unity, of standing together, of taking back what had been stolen from them. Each meeting was an act of defiance, a quiet push against the towering walls that had caged them for so long. At the heart of these gatherings, there was a call for courage that resonated deeply. "Let us stand together," Corvin would say, his voice steady, "and let our courage shine as bright as the morning sun." His words broke the silence that had bound them for generations. Even the simplest actions, sharing food, hiding supplies, or keeping watch for patrols, became small victories. The rebellion was not yet an army, but it was growing. At this point, if you find the story of Ironfrost as gripping as we do, consider showing your support by subscribing for more tales of passion and defiance. Every subscription helps keep these stories alive, connecting more hearts to the spirit of change. As the weeks turned into months, the quiet descent swelled into something stronger. A group of leaders emerged from the shadows, each dedicated to the cause of the common people. Alongside Corvin, there was Elira, a woman of sharp mind and unwavering determination. Her wisdom brought reason where anger threatened to consume them. Then there was Brom, a fighter whose hands were rough from years of labor. His loyalty to his people was unshakable, his presence a source of strength. Together, they crafted a plan, not just for survival, but for victory. The turning point came with the first true act of rebellion. A harsh winter storm had cut off supplies to the Lord's fortified keeps, leaving them vulnerable. The common folk saw their chance. With the storm as their ally, they struck in the dead of night, sabotaging grain stores meant for the nobility. The act was small, but it sent a message. The people of Ironfrost were no longer afraid. From that moment, there was no turning back. Secret meetings turned into daring missions. Supply wagons vanished into the night. Lords awoke to find their outposts abandoned by fearful guards. The whispers of rebellion had become a force that could no longer be ignored. In the frozen lands of Ironfrost, where every breath seemed to carry the weight of oppression, the spark of rebellion had become a raging fire. And soon, the lords would feel its heat. The storm howled through Ironfrost like an omen, its icy winds rattling wooden shutters and piling snow against the doors of peasant homes. But for Corvin and his growing band of rebels, the storm was more than just another cruel trick of nature. It was the perfect cover for their first true act of defiance. The plan was simple, yet dangerous. The village of Halfmere, nestled at the edge of the Lord's supply routes, held a grain store meant for the nobility. If the rebels could seize it, they would not only feed their starving people but also deliver a clear message. The lords were no longer untouchable. Under the cover of darkness, they moved. Corvin led the way, his breath forming pale clouds in the frigid night. Behind him, Elira, Brom, and a dozen others followed, their hearts pounding with the weight of what they were about to do. Some carried crude weapons, pitchforks, hunting knives, wooden clubs, while others relied on their knowledge of the land to guide them unseen through the snow-covered fields. The guards posted at Halfmere were not expecting an attack. They were men who had spent their years enforcing the will of the lords, beating down any sign of disobedience with steel and flame. But on this night, the cold had settled deep in their bones, and their minds were dulled by the long hours of monotonous duty. They huddled by torches and small fires, oblivious to the silent figures creeping ever closer. A signal, a flick of Corvin's hand. Brom, moving like a shadow, took down the first guard with a silent strike. Another rebel swiftly dealt with the second. By the time the remaining guards realized something was amiss, it was already too late. The rebels surged forward. A brief struggle followed. Cries of alarm, the clang of metal, the dull thud of bodies hitting the frozen earth. Then, silence. The storehouse was theirs. Inside, rows of burlap sacks stretched into the darkness, filled with food that could sustain the rebellion for weeks. But this was not just about survival. As Elira moved through the room, her eyes scanning the stolen bounty, she spoke what they were all thinking. This is the beginning. They could have left quietly, disappearing into the storm with their stolen supplies. But Corvin knew that mere survival was not enough. The lords had to understand what was coming. With swift, deliberate motions, the rebels carved a symbol into the wooden walls of the storehouse, a simple sun rising over the mountains, the mark of the uprising. At dawn, when the Lord's soldiers arrived, they found not only empty grain stores but a message left in the snow, written in ash. The dawn belongs to us. The first strike had been made. The people of Ironfrost had declared themselves. And now, there was no turning back. The rebellion had begun, but the cost had been higher than they had imagined. Hearthmare's ashes still stained the snow, and the cries of the innocent haunted the winds that swept through Ironfrost. The people had taken their first step toward freedom, but the lords had made their response clear. Mercy would not be given, only blood. Yet despite the loss, despite the horror, something had changed. The people no longer bowed their heads in quiet surrender. Fear had not crushed them, it had forged them. Corvin stood atop a frozen hill, gazing out over the land that had suffered under the Lord's rule for too long. Below, the rebellion was no longer just a handful of desperate souls. Dozens, no, hundreds, had come. They carried not just weapons, but purpose. Blacksmiths hammered stolen iron into blades. Hunters trained farmers to move silently through the forests, and spies slipped into enemy camps, gathering whispers that could turn the tide of war. Elira stepped up beside him, her cloak whipping in the bitter wind. They will strike again. Harder this time, she said, her voice steady. They think we'll scatter, Corvin replied. That fear will do the work for them. He turned to her, his gaze fierce. But they don't understand, Elira. We are past the point of breaking. Brom let out a low chuckle as he approached. So, what now? We wait for them to come for us. Corvin shook his head. No, we take the fight to them. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what was to come. There would be no retreat, no return to the way things had been. They had struck the first blow, and the lords had answered with fire. Now, the time had come to show them that Ironfrost would not kneel. The rebellion was no longer a dream. It was war, and this was only the beginning.